Hey, it's Silver, and this is Wartales. Wartales is an open-world strategy RPG that, in structure, is probably most similar to something like Mount & Blade or a medieval version of Star Sector. You start out as a band of mercenaries looking to survive, basically, in this world and just try and find some work and make a name for yourselves. When you begin, you'll only have about 4 people and a horse to actually explore the world with, but before long you'll start to recruit more people and gain a larger party and actually become more of like a small regiment. But of course, the larger you get, the more difficult the game gets in a way, because that doesn't only mean increased battle complexity, it also means some stuff like increased survival risk, because you gotta deal with everyone actually getting along with each other, hopefully. You've also got to deal with things like hunger and wages. Every person has a wage that will go up as they get better at what they do, and every 4 rests, I believe it is, you got to pay everyone's wages, and if you pay everyone on time, then everyone will stay very happy and your happiness will increase. But of course the opposite will happen if you don't pay them, and if your happiness dips too low, then people will start to leave and actually just completely escape from your roving band of mercenaries and never come back. You've also got to worry about food, of course, and the game helpfully displays exactly how many days worth of food you actually have based on what you have now and how many people are in your party and stuff, so you do have to worry about food, and the characters sometimes can have special dietary needs, like someone that absolutely has to eat meat every single meal. But oftentimes characters with stats like that also come with some extra benefits, because when you're making characters you can choose a passive trait, a useful passive trait. You can also choose a second useful passive trait, but if you do, you have to also choose a disadvantage. So this means that characters with special restrictions, or any sort of increased management difficulty, basically, they often have something to offset that, so it's up to you whether you want a slightly easier to manage group of characters or a slightly stronger but a little bit more temperamental group of characters. And you also need horses, by the way. You don't have to pay them, but they do eat. They eat about twice as much as the average person, and they carry most of your gear, so if you want a large carrying weight capacity to take lots of loot and supplies with you, then you need horses. And more horses, of course, means drastically increased food necessity, but drastically increased weight you can carry as well. And the game does pretty much just drop you right in the middle of a basic province. There are different provinces you can start in, but at first you'll only have one of them unlocked, and the other ones tend to have a more difficult start, so there's a reason that you can start in the more basic one first. And the game actually has quite a lot of difficulty settings to start out with, which I really appreciate. You can individually choose things like how often you can save, or whether it's like a full Iron Man mode permadeath. You can choose how difficult the combat is separate from everything else, and how difficult the survival mechanics are separate from everything else. So there's definitely a lot of customizability when it comes to how difficult you want your experience to be, which is always nice. This is a game for people like me, basically, that want to explore everything, because you don't really have a main quest line that you're following exactly. You don't have a direction that says, hey, go here first. You just kind of go. You're plopped down in the world in general, and it's now your job to live. Do whatever you have to survive, and make a name for yourself while also figuring some other things out. Because one thing this game does that I really like is it gives each of the provinces or countries that you can go into their own narrative. There's a separate story for all of them, a sort of situation that needs to be solved. And this is a really smart way to do it, in my opinion, because it both gives you complete freedom to approach anything however you want, but also it gives you a thread of a story to follow if you desire to do so, and then you can kind of track your progress across the world by how many of each of the different provinces' situations have been solved so far. Each of the situations is also pretty open-ended. There isn't just one solution that you always arrive at. There are generally different ways to go about solving the problem. So as you're exploring, you'll find these different events that happen that will build up this purple meter, and this purple meter is that particular region's progress on solving their main issue. And then once this meter completely fills up, some sort of big decision-making thing will happen that will display all of the consequences of the decisions you've made thus far and allow you a choice of how you want to actually finish that particular solution out. And then once you do that, it will count as completed, and you can move on to the next province and try and solve whatever is going wrong over there. So, for instance, the initial starting area has a refugee crisis going on. There are refugees from a destroyed empire, basically, or a kingdom, rather, and they're causing some issues, and not everyone is willing to make room for them, and it's sort of your job to decide if they belong there, or if people should actually have to give up some of their grains and things for them and stuff like that. You have various choices along the way as to how welcoming the people should be to the refugees and how you feel they should be handled and where they should be stationed and stuff like that. And eventually it culminates in a large sort of, not an invasion exactly, but more of like almost like a protest at the main city of that province that says, hey, we're the refugees and we want to be alive. And then it's kind of your decision whether you want to protect the city from them or allow them into the city, and then that sort of decides how the whole crisis wraps up. Personally, in my game, I let them into the city, and they basically took it over, and now run the area and are a lot more refugee-friendly in that area than the original people, and there was minimal violence because of the other choices I made that avoided fights on purpose to try and prevent a bunch of innocent people from being killed, because that's how I felt it would be the best to handle the situation. But of course, that's the point of the game, right? You're free to handle the situation however you want and see what happens. In addition to all of the more important story bits that is in each region, there are also some other quests. There's sort of like some procedurally generated quests that you can get at the end of the main town of that particular region, and these are just there to help you get paid, basically. They also give you some influence, which is a currency that you can spend on things like helping people get to your side, whether that means like in a conversation you want them to trust you, or whether that means more literally like recruiting new people into your party. That takes influence. That, of course, leads to the combat. The combat is quite good in this game. It is very tactical, very strategic, and very unforgiving in the higher difficulties. It is a sort of grid-based affair where you're, of course, got a nice top-down view of the battlefield. You can start your characters in various different starting positions, just drag them around and plop them down wherever you want them to go. And the interesting thing about the combat order is there is a specific order to combat, like your turn and the enemy's turn, but when it's your turn, you can move any of your currently unmoved characters. So your party members don't actually have a turn order per se, you just have a turn, and you can move whoever you want on your turn. So this opens up a lot of tactical possibility, because it means that all of the important positioning and maneuvering and things that is done and is very, very much key to a combat system like this, it means that you have a lot more open-endedness to how people maneuver and stuff, because you can move them in whatever order you want. Every character's basic combat skill is actually determined by the weapon they have equipped. Every weapon comes with a skill that they replace your basic attack with whatever it is. Every character also has a class, which determines what types of weapons they can equip, and as they level up, they will gain choices to actually spec into sort of like a prestige class kind of idea, basically, like a secondary advancement, a specialization that gives them some sort of extra active skill they can use, as well as usually the ability to equip certain types of armor they couldn't before. And this is where another one of the game's pretty unique mechanics comes in, and that's the Valor points. Those yellow diamonds at the bottom of the screen in combat. Valor points are gained by resting, as well as by certain other skills and passives that you get as your characters level up. They get more and more different ways to generate Valor. But these are basically like skill points or mana, but they're for the whole party at once. So whenever your character wants to use anything that isn't just their basic attack, like the different active skills they get for leveling, those take Valor points. And they take them from the whole party's pool, so each character doesn't get their own points assigned just to them. This means you got to be careful about who you're letting use these points, because the Valor point skills are often very, very powerful, but also often very situational. They're only super good if you use them in the right circumstance, which is, of course, what you would expect from a combat system like this. Any sort of strategy RPG always has a lot of positioning-based stuff and a lot of, if you're behind them, it does something extra or something like that. You know, various skills based around very situational things that are only going to happen sometimes, so that is punctuated by the fact that you have to spend this party-wide resource on those things in order to actually utilize them at the right time. Once you kill enough of the enemies in any given battle, your party will become galvanized, which is a buff that you definitely want, because it's a huge buff. It's like a 50% damage increase across your whole party at once, so you definitely want to get this as soon as you can. And once you kill enough, the remaining enemies will actually try to flee, and it's up to you whether to allow them to flee or to actually go after them and kill the rest of them. After combat, all of your participating members will get some experience towards their next level, as well as, of course, some loot. There's all sorts of different loot to find, from armors and weapons to just basic money to all sorts of materials, because there are also professions. Every character can be one profession, and you unlock a profession by finding the main thing that uses it for the first time. So, for instance, the apothecary, the alchemist profession, you unlock that by actually using an apothecary table for the first time. At that point, you can choose any of your party members to be that profession, and then once you do, they can use that table to craft various consumables and medicines and things. There are quite a few different professions for you to find throughout the world, and they also have experience and levels unique to them. As your characters perform whatever their profession is, whether that's fishing for the angler or crafting new gear for the blacksmith, they will gain some experience, and once they level up that profession, they will get a new title in it, as well as the ability to make better stuff or do whatever it is they're doing better. You know, a more proficient cook will be able to learn more complex recipes, for instance. You also have a camp that you can pop up whenever you want. This is required because you do have a fatigue meter that lowers as you explore the world, and once it gets critically low, your characters will actually start to get exhausted and get some severe combat penalties and stuff, so you have to rest. Resting requires you to actually feed everyone, and of course if you have enough food basically to feed everyone the exact right amount, then they gain a bunch of happiness, but if not, then people are going to start to get unhappy. Your camp also is pretty customizable. There are lots of different buildings that you can learn how to craft and place down. Usually these are profession-specific buildings, like, you know, a workbench for a tinkerer to craft some lockpicks and some torches and stuff in between dungeon crawls, or a lectern that your party's scholar can actually go to actually get some more knowledge points every rest, as well as research any unknown items you find while dungeon delving. Now, this game does have a low fantasy setting, by the way, so this is not pure medieval. Low fantasy in this case basically means you're not going to have any like fireball slinging wizards in your party, but there are stuff like ghost wolves, and if you encounter ancient tombs, you may find some really nasty stuff inside, things like that. There are monstrous things out there waiting to get you, but you mostly have mundane steel on your side to actually fight back against them. Exploring the ancient ruins, by the way, is really fun because it's completely different to exploring the rest of the game. You actually need torches, first off, like you require them. You actually can't go in if you don't have any torches, and if you run out while you're in there, then everyone runs out and gets damaged as they escape in a panic. But as you're exploring room by room, you get these cool sort of panoramic views of different rooms that you can rotate around and actually find and solve puzzles within them, and find various resources and ancient things for your scholar to research at the lectern. So this means that places like the ancient tombs are actually really involved and have a whole bunch of puzzles and combat encounters and stuff to do, so they're like several day-long events to actually delve into one of these things and try and get everything. But really, I'm just scratching the surface on this, because there's all kinds of other stuff, like the hunts, for instance, special creatures you have to hunt down, and certain merchants that only accept these fangs as currency that you get from killing beasts, and allow you to get all sorts of interesting extra stuff, including armor layers, which are basically like socketable items. Armor can have sockets, and these sockets can contain layers that improve the stats of the one wearing it pretty significantly. The game is also really, really good at giving you a solid sense of progression, because not only do you have things like leveling up your party members and increasing their stats and giving them new skills and new classes and things, but you've also got a couple of other methods of progression, including, of course, the aforementioned professions, but also some things like the knowledge points that you'll get by exploring and finding new things that can be spent on all sorts of stuff. There's a whole list of perks that you can get, and you spend the knowledge points on actually acquiring these perks, and there's also an entire perk tree for every single profession in the game that allows you to craft new and more specialized gear once you actually learn them, learn recipes, or use your knowledge points to buy stuff that you don't get recipes for. So that means there's a bunch of different progression trees for everything, and there's also the paths system. There are 4 different paths in the game that involve different kinds of actions, like one is focused on combat, and one is focused on crafting and merchant skills and the like, and once you complete certain milestones, you can unlock these points that build towards a total, and once this total maxes out, you will get a colored point for that path, and you can then spend that path point on unique perks that only that path has to improve your party. And these include some really useful things like everyone eating less food, or everyone traveling faster on roads, and things like that. This means that there's always something for you to do, between the various missions you're going to pick up in the inn to the actual story missions for each of the regions and completing the particular situation that's happening there, to, of course, just getting new people, advancing their classes, and making them more powerful, and getting some new gear and stuff. There's always stuff to do, and there's also a lot of side quests around the place for you to find, from really basic stuff like go here and kill these things, to really more involved stuff like find a way to successfully kidnap this person that's very heavily guarded. There are also loads of different factions in the game that you can come up against that each have their own agendas and their own wishes around the world, as well as specialized equipment and stuff that only they get, which can sometimes mean you might want to maybe shank a couple of them to get that sweet halberd thing they have, but that's up to you. Also, I should probably mention that the open world in this game is large. It's very, very huge, and you'll be surprised at just how much it keeps going in every direction as you're exploring, and it is not empty. It's not an open world that's large for the sake of saying it's large on the Steam page. It's actually filled with stuff. There's a ton of content to find here, tombs to explore and factions to run into, and weird side quests to happen upon, and of course the main situations for each of the regions to solve. This means that yes, most definitely I do recommend Wartales. It is a fantastic strategy RPG that does everything right and has some really interesting ideas in terms of things that help to mix up the combat and the progression to make them just really interesting and satisfying to take part in. And I'm a big fan of how the exploration and ruins and tombs and stuff works, just because it's so different and atmospheric. I should also mention the music is very good in this game, and the overworld general cavorting around the place music reminds me a lot of the Oblivion exploration music. It just kind of sounds similar to me, so this game has kind of a cozy vibe to it. That means it's fun to settle into the commander's chair of your party and see what happens this session. So yeah, easy recommend, very easy recommend for a fantastic fully featured strategy RPG experience that you should definitely give a shot if you're at all a fan of anything adjacent to these sorts of games, because it's just a joy to play. So thank you guys very much for watching. I'll put a link down to the Steam store page to Wartales in the description below this video if you wish to check it out for yourself, and I'll see you guys next time.